They're industrious, familiar, and they do man an extremely good turn when it comes to pollinating his flowers and crops. People find them attractive and even friendly, perhaps because they seldom sting. Yet few people know about their complex and secretive private life. They bumble about the garden from flower to flower, yet bumble isn't their original name. Because of the humming sound they make, they were, until recently, known as the humblebee. The bumblebee queens who have survived the winter in hibernation appear weak and drowsy in the pale March sun. When they emerge from their overwintered sleep, they're very hungry. They need food urgently, so they search for a source of nectar in the early spring flowers. One of the first plants to flower is the white dead nettle. It provides both pollen and nectar, so it plays a key role in the survival of the queens at this vulnerable period of their lives. Their pollen, packed with protein, is essential in the development of the queen's eggs. Nectar is the fuel which supplies her with energy. After a few weeks, when they've built up their strength, the queens are ready to go searching for nesting sites. They fly slowly, exploring rough banks, hedgerows, and overgrown corners of gardens. Every now and again they land to take a good close look. There are 19 species of bumblebees in Britain. The ginger bumble likes to nest above ground in moss, among tussocks, or even in an old bird's nest. But most bumblebees are subterranean nesters. They often start their colonies in the abandoned burrows of small mammals. Nest boxes do fine, provided they contain material left by their former occupants. Once she's selected the site, the queen takes up residence. For a while now, she'll use those busy, bumbling wings far less. She arranges the nesting material to form an inner chamber and lines this with the finest fibers. There she builds a small wax cell in which she lays her first batch of eggs. She then settles down to brood them, rather like a bird. Right alongside, she builds a storage jar of wax. She fills this with a thimbleful of honey, a reserve of food for rainy days. She can sip by extending her long tongue and without leaving the nest. "5 days after they're laid, the eggs hatch out. Here she's incubating them. As they grow, the larvae extend upwards, so she keeps applying wax to cover them. The larval clump is like a house whose owner is continuously building extensions. She secretes the wax in glands beneath her abdomen. She scrapes it off with her hind legs and passes it with her front legs to her mouth, with which she molds it. Here she's adding wax to the wall around her second generation of offspring. Once the larvae are fully grown, they pupate. They then appear as individual bulges in the wax wall. This acts as a signal for the queen to start building new egg cells. Bumblebees are unique among insects. They can actually generate heat by a chemical process and by a sort of shivering action. There's even some possibility that this heat may assist in hatching the eggs, though scientists won't swear to it. The temperature of a brooding queen can reach 38 degrees centigrade. If the heat inside the brood chamber gets too high, she can cool her brood by pulling aside the roofing material with her tongue. About 5 weeks after the eggs were laid, the first adults emerge. To escape, the young bee bites a hole in the top of its parchment-like cocoon. It's quite a struggle. If the young bee is taking a very long time about it, the queen sometimes helps it out. The first to emerge are all sterile females, much smaller than their mother. They're workers. The reason they're so small is that the queen could only give them limited food during early spring when they began to develop. The smallest may not grow bigger than a housefly. When newly hatched, they're damp, pale, and matted. Their wings are soft and curved and lie limply along the back, but in a few hours they dry out, and the wings become operational. They take a drink from the honeypot, and then move unsteadily back to the comb, to nestle for a while alongside the queen for warmth. Next, a clean-up to remove any remaining pieces of pupal skin. The early workers are destined to assist the queen with household chores for life. Small and weak, they'll rarely, if ever, leave the nest. Not until the second generation of workers emerges will the queen be fully relieved of foraging for food. More and more pollen and nectar will be needed to supply the colony. It will be the task of the larger workers to collect this. Tumbling in the flower of a dog rose, a worker coats herself with pollen. All workers are female, by the way. She has pollen baskets on each hind leg, fringed with long bristles which support the pollen as it is combed out of the coat. This, surprisingly, is not a bumblebee, but a very good imitation. It's a harmless hoverfly which foils its enemies by pretending it's got a sting in its tail. Predators learn to leave bumblebees alone, and look-alike hoverflies cash in on the fact. Long-tongued bumbles are the only bees who can reach the nectar in long tubular blossoms. The flowers benefit from the relationship too. They rely on bumblebees to pollinate them. But short-tongued bumbles and honeybees have worked out a way of cheating. They bite holes at the base of the flower, through which they can insert their tongues and steal the nectar without, of course, doing their share of the pollination. When summer comes, the workers are out foraging from dawn to dusk. The colony is now approaching full production. Not all bumblebee queens start their colonies in natural surroundings. An old garage does very nicely. The nest to which the pollen-laden workers are returning is somewhere beneath that pile of rubble. Look at those brimming pollen baskets. The worker poises herself over the storage vessel and then pushes the pollen down inside. She inspects her work and then tightly packs down the pollen before leaving to collect another load. Here's an unusual consignment of reddish pollen. A normal cargo of pollen weighs about a fifth of the worker's body weight, but they can carry up to half their own weight and still get airborne. Some of the workers leave the moment they've unloaded. Then the smaller household workers move in to finish off the storage and packing process. Other household chores for these smaller stay-at-home workers include spring cleaning the comb and preparing the storage pots for future supplies. The queen made the first honey pot, but most of the later ones are built by the workers. They also adapt empty cocoons, cleaning them out, repairing them, and reinforcing their rims with wax. These housemaids are also responsible for the air conditioning. They can cool the colony down by using their wings as fans, and they can also raise the temperature by generating body heat. Relieved by her worker daughters of all housework, the queen devotes her time to building cells and producing eggs. She lays the foundations of each new egg cell on top of an occupied cocoon. But the wonderful thing is that she does this so that the young bees can still escape when the time comes for them to emerge. Although empty cocoons are adapted for food storage, the queen never uses them again for rearing. The eggs are laid in brand new cells. She's laying at this moment. The pearly white eggs are deposited in a cell already provisioned by the workers with a mixture of nectar and pollen. After she's laid, the queen immediately starts to roof over the cell with yet more wax. When she's satisfied that all is well, the queen hands over to the household workers and lets these small daughters of hers complete the lid and seal the cell. The grubs hatch and shed their skins several times as they grow. When they're fully grown, they cease feeding, start to pupate, and encase themselves in silken cocoons. The brown spots on the grub's body are small closable holes called spiracles through which it breathes. It has no eyes, legs, or wings, but it does have a distinct head. This is where the silk glands open to produce long, sticky threads to weave the cocoon. The heart shows up as a dark tube running the length of the body. In these carefully dissected cocoons are different stages of development. A larva prepares to pupate. Next to it, a soft white pupa already showing adult characteristics. Later still, the pupa gradually darkens. Finally, back to a real emergence. The wings expand, the pupal skin ruptures, and the young adult escapes. Struggling valiantly, the bee finally hauls itself out. At first its coat is a pale silvery grey. After a few days, it takes on the familiar colours of the adult bumblebee. Household workers and newly emerged bees put a heavy strain on honey stocks. Bumble honey is very similar to that produced by hive bees, though slightly thinner. And of course, because the bumblebee colonies are quite small, perhaps 200 bees in all, there's not nearly so much of it in the comb. Honey isn't the only vital commodity that has to be hoarded. A thrifty worker scrapes off the last remnants of wax from a newly vacated cocoon. She'll use it again for plastering and repairing expanding cells and building new ones. So far, all the emerged workers have been females. By midsummer, the time has come to produce some males. Amazingly, they come from the unfertilized eggs laid by some of the largest workers. Here they are building cells and laying the eggs which will eventually develop into male bumblebees. The males can be distinguished from the females by their slightly longer antennae, thicker coats, and fluffy heads. This is also the time when there's a dramatic change in the production of females. Instead of sterile female workers, young queens begin to emerge from eggs laid by the original founder queen of the colony. So now all is ready for the creation of future colonies of bumblebees, though these won't be set up until next summer. Once the males have hatched, they do nothing in the colony except help themselves to honey and nectar. After a few days they leave, never to return. Their main preoccupation now is to find a young queen and mate. Unlike male honeybees, they can forage for themselves, so they do play their part in pollination. On sunny days, they fly the same flight patterns hour after hour. At intervals, they alight to scent mark selected leaves and blossoms to entice young queens. Males and queens often alight to feed on the same flower, but they don't mix feeding with sex, and the queens are allowed to forage without being propositioned. Unlike the males, the queens often return to the colony. They're frequently the last to leave the old and decaying nest. As the summer draws to its close, scavenging mites come out into the open. They clamber onto the young queens in great numbers. They've been living in the colony all the season, doing a valuable job disposing of debris and waste matter. So far they've remained hidden, but now there's less for them to eat beneath the comb. Climbing aboard the young queen is the surest way of hitching a ride to next season's colony. It's time for the queen to leave. Ranks of thistle stamens crowned with pollen, just as well. Young mated queens need great quantities of food, converted and stored as fat, to tide them over until the following spring. Both bee and passenger face a long period of starvation. Faced with a pollen glut, mite and bee gorge themselves to the full. The queen probes with her long tongue past the stamens and down to the nectaries at their base. In final preparation for the cold months ahead, she fills her stomach with nectar. A mite prepares to disembark. It will feed for a while and then pick up another ride from one of the passing young queens. The shortening days and cooler nights of early autumn send any young queen still on the wing into hibernation. They burrow into the soil of a mossy bank or select some other sheltered spot in which to wait, already fertilized, for the following spring. As winter sets in, all bumblebee activity comes to an end, and the first frosts dispose of any stragglers. The hibernating queens, able to manufacture their own antifreeze, sleep safe and sound, oblivious to the icy cold around them. The broken-down garage that housed a busy, bustling community all summer is now silent. In the old nest, there is no sign of life. Entombed in their cocoons, the last generation of bees, trapped and unable to escape before the frosts, lie dead and rotting. The colony is as derelict as the shed which housed it. Decay and parasites will soon demolish the deserted comb. Within a few feet of the entrance to the nest in which she was reared, a young queen slumbers peacefully. At the close of the season, only impregnated young hibernating queens remain. As sole survivors, they are the custodians of their species. Without their pollinating services, many of our crop yields and flower gardens would be the poorer. Yet we continue to take for granted the immensely valuable bumble, the not-so-humble bee.